In the vast, interconnected world we inhabit, events so sudden, so seismic, send ripples across continents in mere hours. Today, we find ourselves at the crossroads of such an event, a striking escalation in the long-simmering tensions between Iran and Israel. This isn't merely a military alarm, it has triggered a profound chain reaction, now gripping the global economy in a state of unprecedented unrest. Our focus today is on dissecting the mechanisms of this shockwave, understanding its origins, and charting its potential trajectories across the international system. The Strait of Hormuz, a critical artery under pressure. At the very heart of the Earth's energy system lies a delicate yet vital artery, the Middle East. Within this region, the Strait of Hormuz, a narrow waterway no wider than a few dozen miles, critically channels approximately a fifth of the world's daily oil supply. This strategic choke point, situated between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman, now pulses under immense pressure due to escalating conflict. Tankers, once moving silently and predictably, now navigate a landscape of heightened hesitation, potential delays, and palpable fear. The lifeblood of modern civilization, crude oil, finds itself under an unprecedented siege, exposing a profound vulnerability in global energy security. Market volatility and the economic ripple effect. As night falls over the Persian Gulf, its shadow extends to trading floors in London, New York, and Shanghai. Traders watch in real time as numbers leap off their screens. Brent crude has surged past thresholds once thought improbable, with West Texas Intermediate not far behind. This isn't just about price hikes, it's panic spreading not in a shout, but a whisper, in the flickering screen lights, in the recalculations of fuel surcharges, and in the revised logistics of everyday goods. The immediate psychological impact on global markets has been undeniable. With missiles launched and military installations struck, the perception of risk has skyrocketed. Investors, analysts, and governments alike understand that even the possibility of further escalation is enough to trigger severe economic consequences. The crude oil price spike following these strikes serves as a stark demonstration of how geopolitical volatility directly affects global energy markets, driven often by fear and speculative trading rather than immediate physical shortages. Historical context and the dangerous turning point. Historically, tensions between Iran and Israel have simmered beneath the surface, driven by deep-rooted ideological, religious, and political rivalries. However, the recent direct strikes between the two nations represent a genuinely dangerous turning point. We've moved beyond proxy engagements and cyber confrontations into open military exchanges, intensifying fears that this conflict could spill over into a broader regional war. Such a scenario would inevitably involve multiple actors, including Hezbollah in Lebanon, various armed groups in Syria and Iraq, and potentially even global superpowers indirectly aligned with either side. What makes this escalation especially alarming is its timing and location, occurring in a region responsible for nearly a third of the world's oil production and a significant portion of its transportation routes. Any significant disruption here threatens to choke vital energy supplies to Asia, Europe, and beyond. Escalation between regional powers. The current escalation is not merely a passing phase of rhetoric or limited skirmishes, it is a systemic build-up involving multiple nations arming themselves, mobilizing troops, and issuing thinly veiled threats that signal something far more dangerous. Iran's strategic positioning and influence over regional militias have grown significantly, with the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, playing a central role in training and funding proxy groups in Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, and Yemen. These proxies, such as Hezbollah and the Houthis, act as pressure points, challenging Israel and Sunni Arab states, especially Saudi Arabia. On the other side, Israel is intensifying its operations, increasing military drills, and preparing for a possible multi-front war, something its leaders have openly admitted. Israeli strikes in Syria targeting Iranian arms shipments have become more frequent, drawing responses that edge closer to full-scale retaliation. The involvement of Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, now engaging in daily cross-border exchanges with Israeli forces, is especially concerning. These skirmishes no longer appear isolated, they are tactical tests, probing weaknesses, setting the stage for a larger conflict. Arab states like Jordan and Egypt find themselves caught in the middle, desperately trying to avoid being dragged into what could be a region-wide war. Turkey, too, a significant military player, has recently increased its rhetoric and surveillance in the region, watching every development with intense scrutiny. Meanwhile, Gulf countries, especially the UAE and Saudi Arabia, are investing heavily in missile defense systems and advanced drones, signaling their awareness of an impending threat. What makes this moment so alarming is the convergence of these forces, ideological, political, and military, toward a single boiling point. Unlike previous flare-ups, which were largely contained, the alliances and rivalries today are cross-border and deeply entrenched. No actor in this equation seems willing to back down, and the tools of war are already in motion. Regional powers are no longer positioning themselves defensively, they are preparing offensively, each believing it has more to gain than lose in the conflict to come. The collapse of ceasefire negotiations and its chain reaction. The collapse of ceasefire negotiations in Gaza has triggered a catastrophic chain reaction across the region, rapidly escalating the situation beyond diplomatic repair. For months, international mediators pushed for a temporary pause in hostilities, seeking humanitarian relief and a return to the negotiating table. But behind closed doors, talks were marred by mistrust, unmet conditions, and growing frustration on both sides. As the ceasefire fell apart, retaliatory strikes resumed with devastating intensity. Israel, citing ongoing threats from Hamas and other militant factions, launched a series of targeted operations deep within densely populated urban areas. The airstrikes, drone surveillance, and precision bombings resulted in widespread destruction, igniting a new wave of casualties among civilians already battered by weeks of warfare. Hospitals, already overwhelmed and undersupplied, struggled to cope with the influx of wounded. Entire neighborhoods were reduced to rubble, and the population, many of them displaced multiple times, faced an increasingly hopeless scenario. In response, militant groups intensified their own rocket fire, reaching deeper into Israeli territory and forcing mass evacuations and a state of emergency in several towns. The cycle of retaliation not only continued but grew in scale, with attacks becoming more organized and unpredictable. Outside forces began taking sides more openly, with Hezbollah initiating its own provocations from the north and Iran hinting at broader involvement if Israeli operations continue. This collapse is not merely the breakdown of a truce, it's the failure of international diplomacy to manage a deeply rooted conflict spiraling into total warfare. Every effort at negotiation has been undercut by conditions neither party is willing to accept, while external backers fuel both sides with weapons, intelligence, and financial aid. The absence of a ceasefire has left the civilian population with no safe corridors, no pause in bombardment, and no assurance of aid. International organizations attempting to provide relief have been either blocked or targeted, resulting in a humanitarian catastrophe worsening by the hour. The breakdown has also shifted the conflict's narrative from a political struggle to a broader ideological war, drawing sympathizers, fighters, and agitators from across the Muslim world and beyond. This dynamic is especially volatile because it introduces new actors into an already saturated conflict, all under the illusion of justice, defense, or retribution. The complete unraveling of ceasefire mechanisms has now transformed Gaza into a tinderbox whose sparks are already igniting fire beyond its borders. Vulnerability of critical infrastructure and diplomatic challenges. The conflict has also raised immediate concerns over the acute vulnerability of critical infrastructure across the Middle East, including vast oil fields, refineries, pipelines, and vital ports. A single targeted strike on one of these facilities could send oil prices soaring even higher, triggering retaliatory actions that further destabilize an already volatile region. Diplomatic efforts to de-escalate have, so far, proved largely ineffective, as both nations frame their actions as defensive responses to aggression. The international community remains palpably divided, with calls for restraint largely overshadowed by the immediate urgency of protecting strategic interests. Meanwhile, media coverage, while necessary, has often magnified the crisis, fueling public anxiety and increasing political pressure in countries already grappling with pre-existing economic challenges. Global supply chain fragility and strategic responses. The global oil supply chain, one of the most intricate and vulnerable systems in the modern economy, is heavily reliant on specific geographic choke points. The Strait of Hormuz, as highlighted, is paramount. Iran, possessing significant influence over the strait, has previously hinted at using it as leverage. Even the mere prospect of a serious threat to shipping through this route instantly sends ripples across global markets, raising alarm about delayed deliveries, increased transportation risks, and skyrocketing insurance premiums for tankers. Major oil-producing countries like Saudi Arabia and the UAE rely heavily on Hormuz for exports, meaning disruption here would create a global shortage, affecting all sectors. In response, governments are scrambling. Strategic petroleum reserves are being eyed, alliances tested, and emergency meetings convened. Nations heavily dependent on oil, particularly in parts of Asia and the United States, have begun reviewing and, in some cases, releasing oil from their strategic reserves. These reserves, designed for precisely such crises, can temporarily ease pressure but cannot compensate for prolonged disruption. This has spurred urgent diplomatic initiatives aimed at de-escalation, ensuring maritime security, and restoring confidence in uninterrupted energy movement. Countries are also accelerating plans to diversify energy sources, investing in renewables and alternative supplies, though these measures take time to implement, leaving the current situation exposed to further instability. The fragility of the oil supply chain, starkly exposed by these tensions, serves as a harsh reminder of how deeply dependent modern economies remain on the uninterrupted flow of fossil fuels. The economic shockwaves on global markets. The economic shockwaves triggered by the Iran-Israel conflict have reverberated across global financial markets, revealing the intricate and immediate connection between geopolitics and economic stability. Stock markets worldwide reacted sharply to the surge in oil prices and the profound uncertainty surrounding the escalating hostilities. Key indices in the United States, Europe, and Asia experienced sudden drops, with energy-sensitive sectors such as transportation, manufacturing, and consumer goods bearing the brunt of investor anxiety. The financial world thrives on forecasts and risk management, and when geopolitical events upend expectations, panic often follows. This conflict introduced layers of uncertainty, making market valuation difficult. Investors flocked toward safe haven assets like gold, government bonds, and the US dollar, while energy companies saw rapid valuation shifts. For oil-importing nations, the rising energy prices translated into immediate economic strain. Developing economies, already struggling with post-pandemic inflation and debt, were particularly vulnerable. Higher oil prices directly lead to increased transportation and production costs, raising prices on goods, reducing household purchasing power, and potentially leading to social unrest. Even in advanced economies, central banks reconsidered interest rate cuts to avoid triggering further inflation. This market reaction is a stark reminder that in a globally connected system, regional tensions have the power to trigger financial shocks on an international scale, regardless of their distance from the battlefield. The burden on ordinary lives, a global ripple. The ripple effects of rising oil prices are being felt most acutely in the daily lives of ordinary people around the world. As the Iran-Israel conflict intensifies, the immediate impact is seen at fuel stations, grocery stores, and on utility bills. Consumers are confronting higher costs for gasoline and diesel, which not only affects individual transportation expenses but also increases the price of transporting goods across supply chains. This leads to an overall rise in the cost of essential items, including food, clothing, and household products. For working-class families, especially in developing nations, this additional financial strain can mean cutting back on other critical needs such as healthcare, education, or housing. Farmers and manufacturers who depend on petroleum-based inputs are facing increased production costs. These costs are often passed on to consumers, contributing to inflationary pressure. The situation reveals how fragile everyday life becomes when energy prices spike, especially in a world still heavily reliant on fossil fuels. This geopolitical conflict, though occurring far from most people's homes, translates into direct, tangible hardships for millions. The modern battlefield, cyber warfare. The modern battlefield in the Middle East is no longer confined to ground forces, tanks, or airstrikes. It has expanded into the unseen realm of cyberspace, where digital warfare plays an increasingly dominant role in shaping conflicts and outcomes. State-sponsored cyber attacks have surged in frequency and sophistication, with critical infrastructure such as power plants, water systems, transportation networks, and financial institutions becoming prime targets in this new frontier. Countries like Iran and Israel are locked in a silent war where computer code replaces bullets and servers are more powerful than missile silos. Iranian cyber units have been accused of launching attacks on Israeli hospitals, energy grids, and government agencies, causing temporary shutdowns and widespread fear. In response, Israeli cyber operations have allegedly penetrated Iranian nuclear facilities and disrupted the functioning of major industrial systems, using malware and logic bombs to inflict silent damage. Beyond the state-to-state conflict, non-state actors and proxy groups have also entered the cyber domain, conducting misinformation campaigns, hacking into communications, and manipulating public sentiment across social media platforms. These efforts aim to weaken morale, spread propaganda, and confuse the population during high-tension events. The result is a climate where trust in information is eroded and chaos can be manufactured without firing a single shot. The battle for public perception becomes as critical as the battle on the ground, with narratives being crafted, distorted, and deployed as tools of psychological warfare. Moreover, financial systems have come under direct threat, with hackers targeting banks, digital payment networks, and even cryptocurrency exchanges, threatening economic stability in both local and international markets. As more systems become digitized and reliant on networked infrastructure, the potential for disruption grows exponentially. What makes digital warfare particularly dangerous is its ambiguity. It is often difficult to trace the origin of an attack, making retaliation legally and diplomatically complex. This provides cover for aggressors and creates a dangerous environment where escalation can happen without clear evidence or accountability. International laws and treaties are still catching up with the realities of cyber warfare, leaving a vacuum that many actors are exploiting. In the Middle East, where tensions are already high and every move is closely watched, a single cyber attack, misattributed or misunderstood, could ignite a much larger conflict. The digital front is now as critical and volatile as any military front line, and its impact reverberates not only through the region but across the world's connected systems. The dangerous layer, global superpower involvement. The involvement of global superpowers in the Middle East has added a dangerous layer of complexity to an already volatile region. What was once viewed as a regional conflict between neighboring states and armed factions has now evolved into a high-stakes geopolitical arena where the interests of the United States, Russia, and China intersect, clash, and often escalate tensions rather than ease them. The United States, with its long-standing alliance with Israel and strategic military bases across the Gulf, has maintained a prominent and assertive presence. It provides advanced weaponry, intelligence, and diplomatic support to its allies and has recently increased naval patrols and troop deployments in key areas as a show of force. Meanwhile, Russia plays a dual role, publicly calling for de-escalation while simultaneously deepening its ties with Iran and the Assad regime in Syria. It seeks to expand its influence through arms sales, military advisors, and oil-based partnerships that not only undermine Western influence but embolden regional actors like Hezbollah. China, although less militarily involved, is exerting its power through strategic economic investments and quiet diplomacy. It has deepened its energy ties with Gulf nations and recently brokered talks between Iran and Saudi Arabia, showcasing its growing diplomatic reach. However, its interests are threatened by instability that could disrupt oil flow and regional trade. Each superpower operates from a different playbook, pursuing divergent goals and, in the process, fueling opposing sides. This has turned the region into a proxy battlefield where actions are no longer taken in isolation but often to signal, provoke, or counter the influence of a rival global power. As these superpowers insert themselves further into the conflict, their presence limits the possibilities for neutral negotiation. Every move made by a local actor is either backed or opposed by a larger player, reducing the autonomy of regional diplomacy and increasing the chances of a broader confrontation. Military assets of these nations are now in dangerously close proximity, whether in the Mediterranean Sea, the Persian Gulf, or Syrian airspace. The risk of miscalculation, accidental clashes, or deliberate provocation is higher than ever. The global powers may claim to seek stability, but their rivalry ensures that any solution is shaped by power, not peace. Their involvement doesn't just influence the conflict, it redefines its scope, making any escalation not just regional, but potentially global in consequence. Global unpreparedness and future outlook. As the Middle East edges toward a potential large-scale conflict, the global community appears alarmingly unprepared to respond effectively to the speed and scale of the crisis. International institutions that were built to prevent war and preserve peace, such as the United Nations and various regional coalitions, have proven slow, reactive, and politically divided in their responses. The diplomatic machinery that once held the power to de-escalate regional disputes is now bogged down in bureaucratic paralysis, often issuing statements long after damage has been done. This inability to respond swiftly has allowed tensions to escalate unchecked, leaving civilians exposed and nations acting unilaterally. Humanitarian agencies, already stretched thin from crises in Ukraine, Sudan, and elsewhere, are struggling to position supplies and staff in anticipation of the humanitarian fallout that a wider Middle East war would bring. At the same time, the rapid pace of modern warfare leaves very little room for traditional diplomatic interventions. In a matter of hours, cyber attacks can disable critical infrastructure, missile strikes can devastate cities, and social media can fuel widespread panic or civil unrest. The mechanisms of peacekeeping, negotiation, and international pressure simply cannot keep up with the evolving tools of destruction. NATO, often looked to for deterrence and stability, is entangled in commitments across Eastern Europe and hesitant to directly intervene in a region where interests are deeply fragmented. The European Union, facing internal divisions and energy insecurity, has little political cohesion to act decisively, while the United States finds itself navigating conflicting alliances, domestic polarization, and the risk of being drawn into yet another prolonged conflict. This unpreparedness is not merely operational, it is intellectual and moral as well. Global leadership lacks a coherent strategy for dealing with multi-layered conflicts that combine conventional warfare, proxy battles, cyber aggression, and ideological extremism. The traditional tools of sanctions, arms embargoes, and peace summits seem increasingly irrelevant in the face of actors who see existential stakes in the fight and are willing to defy global norms to pursue their objectives. As this crisis deepens, the lack of preparation from the international community threatens not only the people of the Middle East but the stability of the world order itself. The warning signs are glaring, the threats are explicit, and yet the global response remains fragmented and dangerously delayed. Conclusion: the countdown has begun. The Middle East stands on the brink of a historic turning point, one that could either lead to irreversible destruction or force a long overdue reckoning with how the world confronts conflict. In just 72 hours, decisions made in war rooms, on border lines, and behind keyboards could redraw maps, disrupt economies, and determine the fate of millions. What unfolds will not be contained within the sands of one region, it will ripple across continents, shaking markets, moving armies, and testing the resilience of humanity itself. The time for warnings has passed. The world must awaken, not tomorrow, not next week, but now. For these are not just the most dangerous 72 hours for the Middle East, they are a global alarm no one can afford to ignore. This in-depth analysis is based on comprehensive research and expert commentary, offering crucial perspectives on the ongoing situation. Thank you for taking the time to engage with this critical topic. Stay informed, stay analytical, and may clarity guide the days ahead.